Okay, so yeah, good morning. I'm Hannah Norman, as Michael just mentioned, and I work for Food Sense Wales in a hybrid role with the Soil Association, working on kind of full system change from a policy level right down to a community level. And as Michael mentioned, I'm also an organic grower, a horticulture grower as well. So the main area of focus I'm going to touch on today is food partnerships. Hopefully I can give you an insight into what a sustainable food partnership is. I'll touch on an example of how some of the sustainable food partnerships that I work with are using healthy and sustainable production to strengthen routes to markets for farmers and create new opportunities, particularly around public procurement. That's the example I'm going to use today. And to finish, I'll briefly share a little about Sustainable Food Places as a network and an exciting opportunity happening in Wales at the moment. So, as outlined by some of the previous speakers, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about some of these areas over this weekend and previous weekends, and as consumers yourselves, I'm sure you're very aware that we're part of this very complex global food system. But what I'm going to talk about is how and what can be achieved on a local level. So even at a local level, the subject of food crosses over into so many different areas. And here's just some examples that you can see on your screens here. So I won't run through everything, but as you know, we can't talk about food without talking about health, which we're talking about here today with diets, the quality and quantity we consume, how that affects our bodies and our minds and our general well-being, and with that nutrition, the environment, and what we produce in a way that gives back, that improves the planet rather than taking away finite resources. Education and food literacy. How do we learn about food? How do we all know how to cook, how to grow? How do we understand nutrition? How do we know where our food comes from? Accessibility and affordability. How do we access food, and how do we make food reach every single person? You know, it is a right for us to access food. How do we make sure that food is affordable for the consumer? And this is, you know, something that is really pressing at the moment with the cost of living crisis. But not just that, but how can we make sure that our food is grown, reared and produced in a way that supports the financial livelihoods of our farmers and producers? And touching on that employment, the food sector employs a vast range of people. And we've mentioned farmers and producers, but what about packaging, transport, retail, hospitality, and then trade, which I think you're going to learn a little bit more about this afternoon. That's a complex global network of imports and exports. And then you've got policy, governance and standards regulating all of these different areas, from health to recommendations on the agriculture bill. And then something a bit closer to home, we can't forget about culture and heritage. So food and meals from different regions and how important that is for people. And then let's not forget, we're talking about all these really serious issues around food, but I want to remind you that eating should be a joy. It shouldn't be about survival and what we can afford. It should be about an experience with friends and families and just really enjoying eating. So keep that in mind as we're talking about having these discussions today. So as you know, one issue that the sector faces is siloed working, a lack of joined upness, and there's fantastic work happening and progress in all these different areas that we're talking about. But as we've already established, it's really a complicated, it's this massive web with all these actors in it, and they're all interlinked. And what we need, because let's be real, the health of both our planet and the people are dependent on positive long-term solutions. And what we believe is, well, one approach to this is developing sustainable food partnerships. And this is taking a place-based approach and through cross-sector working. So place-based meaning focusing on a physical place, its people, landscape and the structures that surround them. And cross-sector meaning people from different parts of the system working together. So as you can see here, I've got a definition that a sustainable food partnership is this cross-sector group that come together around a common vision of creating a more sustainable food system. So what does this look like and what does it mean? So it means that when decisions are being made, a representative from all these different sectors are sitting around the table, making decisions and taking actions together. We can't ignore health if we're talking about hunger and poverty. Yes, fundamentally, people need to eat, but what if we're talking about food banks and emergency food aid, is there resources to increase the nutritional benefit and the quality of food available to these families and people? Is there a way of involving local farmers and growers in providing healthy, local and sustainable food to these outlets? And at the same time, what resources can we make available to people and understand what healthy and sustainable food is, how they can cook it, how they can produce it, and kind of get out of that poverty cycle? So this is a very brief diagram of how a food partnership can be structured. And talking about place-based, this is completely different in every place that a food partnership is established because it represents that area. So around that table is, for example, the local authority, representatives from the health board, private businesses, the voluntary sector, farmers unions, food networks, food bank representatives, local health services, you know, organisations, supermarkets, retailers, farmers, growers, schools, everybody is all part of this. And it's a two-way, well, kind of a two-way system in a way that it's not top-down. It's not policy telling people what they should eat and how they should eat it and where they should get it from, but it's a response to the community. What do their communities need? What are those pressing issues that they need to resolve? And how can they all work together as one system to resolve some of these problems? So this has already been touched on, so I'll fly through the next couple of slides, but just a little bit around why we're talking about local food production and kind of place-based. We know that food picked in season is most nutritious. Smaller farms and local farms generally have greater biodiversity and stronger ecological management principles. Producing food locally cuts down on food miles, so the time taken from being picked to the consumer on your plate. And growing food and selling food locally keeps money in the local economy, and I know you're touching on that this afternoon as well. I'm going to skip past this first example just because I know we're short on time today. So we're going to talk about an example that one of our food partnerships in Wales has been working on this year, the Courgette Public Procurement Pilot. The report on this is actually coming out next week, so kind of giving you a bit of an insight before that goes public. So when we're talking about public procurement around food, we're talking about getting food and ideally healthy, sustainably produced food into schools, care homes, hospitals, and other public outlets. Now, the main barrier to public procurement is security. To provide food to these outlets, food has to be produced at scale. To produce at scale, farmers, growers, and food producers need to invest upfront in seeds, feed, land management. So they need the reassurance that suppliers and wholesalers putting food into schools will buy them continuously for the following season at a price that covers their costs. On the other side, suppliers putting food into these outlets need reassurance from growers that they can produce enough food consistently, regardless of crop health, climate issues. And because of that doubt, public procurement is an area that makes little progress. However, the Sustainable Food Partnership in Cardiff, known as Food Cardiff, which was the first one in Wales, this year decided to just take action, do a pilot and see what happened. And keep it simple, the vegetable that they chose was courgettes. It's a resilient, fast-growing vegetable which has high yields in the summer. Two local organic growers on a farm just outside Cardiff were keen to get involved, so they planted up and grew the courgettes. A well-known South Wales food wholesaler, Castle Howell, managed the logistics of getting the food into the schools, and the schools, through a holiday enrichment programme called Food and Fun, made resources available to not only make the courgettes into tasty, nutritious food, but to help educate the children on how to make tasty, nutritious, healthy food with the courgettes. And the results. Now, it's worth mentioning that there were challenges identified, such as the price difference between producing an organic courgette and a local and a non-organic courgette. But during this trial, the wholesaler kindly absorbed the imbalance in the cost rather than putting on the school or the grower. And as I said, the full report is coming out on the Food Sense Wales website next week, so keep your eye open for that. But overall, the impact of the pilot was positive, and it is now actually going to be trialled into further food partnership regions. So here are quickly some of the findings. So nearly 1 tonne of courgettes made it through the supply chain into these schools. 3 weeks of Food and Fun summer programme. It involved 29 primary schools, feeding nearly 1,500 children. So just to round up a couple of points at the end here, I'm briefly going to mention Sustainable Food Places. Now, this is a national programme that supports the development of food partnerships across the UK. And I support this programme. I help through this, the food partnerships in Wales. So we're now looking at over 90 nationwide food partnerships across the UK. So it's worth looking in your areas to see what's happening and whether you have a food partnership in your place. And not only are these partnerships doing great work in their places, but through the support of Sustainable Food Places as a programme, linking each other and creating networks and peer support. So these fantastic initiatives that come out with these food partnerships can be shared and replicated across the whole of the UK. So it creates a bigger, stronger voice advocating for healthy and sustainable food for all. And then just to end on a really positive point, I quickly want to mention an opportunity that has recently come out of Wales. So through the fantastic work that Food Sense Wales and our partner organisations and our food partnerships have done over the past few years, in June last year, Welsh Government announced that it would provide £2.5 million towards the development of sustainable food partnerships all across Wales. So Wales currently has 7 food partnerships who are part of that Sustainable Food Places network that I mentioned. And we support 2 other areas currently developing a food partnership. So this money has been allocated in a way that will guarantee the establishment of a sustainable food partnership in every local authority in Wales, and 2 in Powys, which is our largest county. So we're going from 7 food partnerships to 23 sustainable food partnerships, which is absolutely fantastic news. And we're involved as Food Sense Wales, we're the key organisation supporting the development of that. And what will be interesting to see is how much faster change is made with the support of government funding going directly into systematic long-term change. So hopefully that gave you, it was a whistle-top tour of what a sustainable food partnership is. It can be quite complicated to understand, so please, go through the slides and have a look at like the structure and some of the information mentioned. But yeah, thank you very much.